Good morning. If you want to grab food and take a seat, we will get started in just a minute or two. And if you didn't grab a hymnal, you might want to do that. There are some up in front by the door. All right, good morning. We are kicking off our last Bible study of 2025. So this is a 5-week study with a break for Thanksgiving. Our guest presenter for this study is Pastor Professor Jason Oakland. So this is Jason's 5th school year at Wisconsin Lutheran College. He's been there since 2021. Prior to that, he was at Martin Luther Lutheran Church in Neenah for 17 years. He is currently working on, in addition to teaching at WLC, he's currently working on his PhD in Reformation Studies at Concordia University in St. Louis, and he is having, he's not sure exactly of the direction of his dissertation, but it will be something to do with Johannes Bugenhagen, who was the first Lutheran pastor at Wittenberg. So, welcome to Jason.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation to join you here today. And hopefully this will be a worthwhile study here as we take a look at hymnology. Well, hymnody, I would say in general, but specifically focused on Martin Luther and the hymns that he has written. That's going to be our focus primarily, but it may take us into a few other areas as well. So you have the study document, see that there, and guys went over and above, printed even in color. I'm impressed. So that is over and above. And I titled this "With United Heart and Voice." That's a phrase taken from the one of his hymns, the first one that we're going to study today, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So with United Heart and Voice, study on some of the hymns of Martin Luther. It would be great to cover them all, but we're going to need far more than 5 weeks to do that if that's the case. And some of them are quite familiar, others not so much. And the picture here on the cover, you'll see, you maybe recognize, well, you certainly see the name Martinus Luther, and maybe you can make out a little bit of the text there. Might be a little bit clearer to see up here. Of course, it is in German, but anybody recognize the hymn there by the picture? A Mighty Fortress, Ein feste Burg is the German title for that. This is the first. The first hymnal that included that was printed in 1529, and then the second edition of that hymnal was in 1533, and this is a copy of the second edition hymnal, and they believe this is the only surviving version of that second edition of the hymnal, and they have it in the Luther House Museum in Wittenberg. So that's kind of a prized piece of their collection, just because that's literally the only one left in the world. So there you see kind of what that might have looked like as far as when they would print these hymns, when they would make them available in a hymn book. That would be an example of that. So today we are going to start with lesson 1, and some of this may be a bit of review, but it's also the idea of trying to give a little bit of background and lay a foundation for just studying and evaluating hymns in general. So that's kind of what we are going to start with today. And we are going to start with a couple of questions. What do you enjoy about hymns? And then we'll follow that up with what do you find challenging? Yeah.
They got a lot of catchy melodies.
A lot of catchy melodies. A lot of catchy melodies. Yes?
They can evoke a lot of emotions.
They definitely touch on, they appeal to the emotions, they affect the emotions. There is an emotional impact there, even among German Lutherans.
Memorable language, like often comes to mind even before scripture sometimes.
Yeah, memorable language, the poetic language that has a way of sticking with you, that has a way of taking those truths and making them memorable. Yes? They preach the gospel. They preach the gospel. And sometimes even when the pastor has a bad week, and I'm speaking from personal experience, my own experience, not in preaching, not in listening, but you know, when the pastor has a bad week, God be praised that the gospel proclamation that's there in the hymns doesn't change or doesn't waver. Anyone else? Okay, then, the other side of the coin. What do you find challenging about hymns? Yes? Okay, so the limited vocal range, or I think we could just say the vocal range or the expectation of vocal range in general is sometimes, you know, I mean, some of those hymns you're traveling more than an octave by a ways, which is a challenge for a lot of people. I mean, you probably want your melody to have more than a range of 3 or 4 notes, but at the same time, some of them you are really covering a lot of territory on the musical staff. Other challenges? Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Using outdated language.
Sometimes the language which is poetic can be beautiful, but the language can also be challenging, right? And what are some of the things that maybe add to the challenge of language?
The shifting of words over time, specifically when one word in whatever century meant X, but
Sure.
that same word in this century is more colloquial of another meaning Y. So it can kind of, the sands can kind of shift underneath the intended meaning of the enterprise.
Yeah, time changes the meaning of words. Again, Luther wrote his hymns 500 years ago. The words have changed in 500 years, haven't they? Other challenges with language specifically?
When you have English as a second language and there's an abbreviated word or you're trying to hit the syncopation right to get the word out, that gets tricky.
Yeah, that, you know, these are poetic words set to music, and you can't just say, well, we're going to stretch the line a little bit. We're going to add a couple of syllables. or where this word in the original language was 3 syllables. It's only one word in our language. Do we just hold it an extra couple of notes? What do we do with that, right? That there are challenges that come with that. Yeah?
Wording is convoluted because you have to make it rhyme.
Right. That there are also rhyme schemes. There are not only rhythm schemes, but there are rhyme schemes, and sometimes to make it fit the rhythm or the rhyme. Great throwback hip hop song, but right, you have to change it. You have to change some things or make it sound. It sounds a little awkward. Yeah.
The harmonies, although are oftentimes very, very beautiful, are not always intuitive unless you're able to sight read.
Yeah.
Although I can't sight read on the spot, so the harmonies can really be a challenge if I don't know it.
Recognize not only that language changes through the years, but musical literacy or expectation changes through the years too. What might sound great to the medieval ear is a real struggle for us in the 21st century. What the monks loved to chant, some 1,500 years ago, maybe not so appealing to us anymore, right? Yeah, you want to follow up on that?
I actually had a question too. Sure. Did Martin Luther write the harmonies?
Some, yes, not all. And we'll touch on that in just a little bit, kind of what part of these belong to Luther. Yeah. Okay, the familiar bar tunes to 16th century Germans. And what do we mean by that? Like these were tavern songs, like they were hoisting their beer steins and singing in the taverns? Sometimes that's the idea. Oh, that's a bar. No, not in that way. He used folk melodies, but the bar songs had to do more with the musical arrangement of things, not the location where they were sung, right? But you're right in saying what was common maybe in the 16th century or easy or pleasant even is a challenge at times for us in the 21st century. One more.
Back to what I enjoy about the
Sure,
yeah. If I granted light on my deathbed and being able to hear and see, being able to sing the hymns that I learned as a child and through adulthood, as I've seen other people do, especially with Alzheimer's, they may not know who you are, but they remember the hymns that they sang their whole lives.
Yeah. Because they touch on different parts of your mind, they have a way of sticking with you when other things leave. I'll share just one personal example of that. When I first started in ministry, I had a shut-in woman who was in an Alzheimer's, memory care type of unit, and she was 99, I think, when I started, and went and lived to over 100. But I would go and visit. We would take turns, my associate and I, going and visiting. He at least knew her before her memory was entirely all but gone. When I would go and visit her, she looked frightened. And I would try to say, hey, I'm with the church. I serve with Pastor Maurice. I want to talk about Jesus, trying all sorts of different things. Nothing, but honestly, kind of look like I'm scared of you. And I have no idea who you are or why you're here, and this is just scary. I mean, can you blame her, right? And then we went Christmas caroling there I think it was the second year that I was serving. And one of the things that was very a popular thing, remained a tradition at the congregation, was that none of them could speak German, but when you sing Silent Night, you have to do at least one of those stanzas in German. And we sang Silent Night, and the first stanza we sang was Stille Nacht. And her face just lit up. The biggest, gone is this scowl. Gone is this look of fear. And the biggest smile you've ever seen. And she is, attempting to sing along and say, because that stuck. It wasn't that it wasn't that her grasp of the gospel or Jesus or any of those things. It wasn't that had departed, but those connections and understanding of how that came together, that had been significantly blocked. And this was an example, at least for me, as someone who might be preaching for her funeral one day, said that's something to remember. That's something to take note of. And why? Not only was it the hymn, I think it was also the language, because she had been confirmed in German. That was still the practice when she was going through. All right. A lot of good things to think about. I think one of the things that we maybe didn't specifically mention that we maybe should is not only does the passing of time and the use of language change, but Luther wrote these things 500 years ago. He also didn't write them in English, right? And so when you have to go through a translation process, that is an art form in and of itself. To take German poetry and German that has this meter and rhyme scheme, and now make it English poetry that still fits this meter and rhyme scheme, that's just a whole nother layer of challenge with that. So just something to be aware of there. The other thing, what do you hope to learn about Luther? What do you hope to learn about hymns from this study? Yeah.
The stories behind the hymns, like what inspired him to write them?
Stories behind the hymns. That's a good thing. Some of them we know a fair amount about. Others, not so much. And that's, we'd love to know more with some of those, but we don't always have that, but it's always good when we do. Yeah?
I would love to learn more about the context of the melodies that are chosen, because the style over time, and I've always been curious about where that melody comes from.
Yeah, we'll get a chance to touch on a few of those as well. Again, some of those we know, some of those we don't. Some of those Luther are original to Luther. Some of those he draws from other sources, but we're not always able to pinpoint exactly what that is. Yeah?
Maybe just how the hymns over time, which verses have been retained, which ones we still sing, which ones we don't, and kind of maybe what's been lost.
Yeah, that is a good thing to keep in mind too, is that sometimes the expectation when they were first written was like, man, if you don't have at least a dozen verses there, you really aren't doing your job. What are we going to do with the rest of the service when all we're singing is 3 stanzas, right? So it was not uncommon that you're having 10, 12, 15 stanzas to a hymn back in those early days. And Luther has some of those, but I would say Luther also is not afraid to have a few of the shorter ones. And I think Luther's hymns, maybe more so than, I think the real tragedy is when you get to Paul Gerhardt. And Paul Gerhardt writes a lot of long hymns. That's 100 years or so removed from Luther, after Luther. But hymnal committees are always abridging his. And some of the best stanzas, because, well, you know, you maybe don't have to sing all 15 of them, but, you know, leave them there as a devotional aid, if nothing else. Some of my favorite of Gerhardt's stanzas have hit the cutting room floor. You got to go all the way back maybe to the Lutheran hymnal to see the last time they were published. And not just in Christian worship hymnals, but in other denominations too. So we'll get a chance to explore one of those, especially in our study. And I'm glad that in our blue Christian worship, they've restored the full number of stanzas that had been cut back in the red one. Yeah.
How instrumentation has changed over time?
Okay. Yeah, we'll get a chance to, I mean, sorry I can't share any live recordings of Luther playing his hymns or singing them in Wittenberg at the time. But you're right that, you know, how they would do this is a little bit different, which we don't have. You know, I think the organ as instrument was kind of the standard, but we don't have always a ton of the specifics, at least from Luther himself, but some of those who build on Luther's foundation, we get to see that a little bit more. And maybe at the very least we can point to a couple of resources for that as we go. Yeah?
I don't know if Luther has any of Luther's hymns that do this, but I noticed in the hymnal there'll be the same melody but different words.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is that decided? I like that melody, so therefore I'm going to make it fit for this, and this, and this.
Yeah. So a lot of times when they would, this is always, you know, this was kind of a new thing when Luther starts doing this, and oftentimes when they would print the hymnals, you know, for people, they would print just words, oftentimes, and but they would give the title of the melody, and so people knew a number of standard melodies that they had. And so it would be, we're singing it to this melody, and we'll see that when we get to our last lesson. We'll talk about maybe some of those choices, like how do you know what to sing it with, or what does that look like? And we'll get a chance to talk specifics about that, at least with one of those hymns for sure, in our last lesson. All right, then, laying a foundation. This is what the city of Wittenberg would have looked like at Luther's time. You'll notice relatively small. On the banks of the Elbe River, there is a wall that runs around the city. You can kind of, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. You can see kind of parts of the wall here. This would have been one of the gates. The castle, the residence of the elector, which would include the castle church, that's over here. That's famous because why? Castle church, that was the place where he nailed the 95 Theses, right? This other one with the 2 bell towers, that would be the city church. That would be where Luther did most of his preaching when he was preaching. That would have been the church that served the community. That would have been also the church that the parish pastor, so Johannes Bugenhagen, that's where he was pastor, the church that he served. And that's pretty much right in the middle of town. And then you get over to this end, and I think this is the structure, but I'm not 100% positive. It could be a couple of these different ones. But I think on this map, this is the structure that would have been the Black Cloister, the Augustinian monastery that then became Luther's home. So that is kind of, just so you have kind of a little bit of a lay of the land there as far as where this is taking place. There are a number of places that we could start when we begin a study centered on matters of worship and hymnody. Hymns fit that category, and it would be good to talk about a few things before we get to the hymns themselves. So we're going to talk, and after our first lesson, we're going to try to cover 2 hymns of Luther each of those weeks. We'll see if we're successful in that or not. I don't know. If we have to pick and choose as we get along, get farther along, that's okay. So again, feel free to ask as many questions as you want along the way. And so when it comes to this laying of foundation, we want to recognize first that Jesus has not commanded us to worship in one exact specific way. There is freedom for us in the New Testament. That's different than what it was in the Old Testament, right? In the Old Testament, God had pretty specific instructions that covered a whole lot of areas, not only where they were supposed to worship, how they were supposed to worship, what they were supposed to do, who was supposed to do it, all of these different things. In the New Testament, He has left a lot up to us in Christian freedom. So you will not be able to find a passage or portion of Scripture that supports in any kind of way, this is the only right way in which you do these things. Just won't find it. But we do talk about principles. And it is appropriate to talk about principles of worship and principles of worship that we see drawn from the Scriptures. Not that the Scriptures say this is exactly how it has to be, but principles that are drawn from there to guide us in making these decisions when it comes to our worship services. So they guide our worship practices and decisions when we're planning all those types of things. And we make use of these principles and their application in the Lutheran Church as well. So let's talk about briefly each one of these principles. These you'll find in a variety of sources, especially among Wells-produced literature. Yet at the same time, you'll find them maybe not quite in these exact words, but throughout Lutheran literature, and because they're drawn from the work and the decisions and the study that Luther and the Reformers themselves did back when they were working through some of these decisions of what does it mean now to have a new evangelical Lutheran worship service. Which maybe start with just a little bit about that. So it would have been 95 Theses, 1517, right? And as we get into the early 1520s, there is more meat put on the bones, so to speak, as far as what does it mean to be evangelical, what does it mean to be Lutheran, what does it mean to follow the Reformation. And Luther produces his Latin service, so he reforms the Latin Mass. That's published in 1523, and in early 1525, they produce the German version, the Deutsche Messe, the German version of the worship service. In 1524, the first Lutheran hymnal is published in Wittenberg, and not the Lutheran hymnal. I mean, we saved that till 1941 here, but I mean that's the one and only, right? But not quite. But that first one that they did only had 8 songs in it. It was called the eight songbook hymnal, but that was the beginning of it. So while they're going through this, they're producing some of these things, and they're having to decide, okay, what do we do? What do we change? What do we get rid of? What do we keep? All of these type of things. And at this time, as you make your way through the 1520s and beyond, other places, so it kind of starts in Wittenberg, but other places are saying, hey, we want to become Lutheran in our community, in our territory, in our country even. And one of the guys that is largely responsible for producing these documents that serve as guidelines that help establish what does it mean to be evangelical and Lutheran when it comes to your administration of your church, how you worship, some of those type of things, was Johannes Bugenhagen, and there were other guys. They would go around, they would be sent out, and they would help a territory produce a church order, a Kirchenordnung, which also helped establish this is what, it covered a lot of different things, but it also helped them establish this is what a Lutheran worship service would look like in your territory. So this is where you see some of these principles coming from. It's not just, I will make some of these up because this is what I want to see. These are drawn from Reformation decisions, practices, principles that they're operating with. So the first one there, number one, fill in the blank there. How would you complete that? Let the blank predominate. Let the gospel predominate, right? And you see the Romans passage there. That sets the theme for the book of Romans, right? It is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. For in the gospel, righteousness is revealed that is by faith, right? This is that section from Romans. And so when it comes to worship, what needs to be at its heart and core and center and everything has to be about this ultimately, it is the proclamation of the gospel. That has to be the big overriding thing. So what does that mean in your own words, would you say? That the gospel predominates?
We do in church settings has to circle back to the gospel.
Everything circles back to the gospel. Anyone else? Yeah?
The message has to come through clearly.
The message has to come through clearly. In other words, content really has to be the thing that drives this, right? Anyone else? Those are certainly good things. How about the second one? Let the blank participate. Let the people participate. And if you look up those 1 Peter passages, that's exactly what you will find there. This idea of, you're a holy priest, a royal priesthood, a holy people. You should be active. You should be involved. Those type of things. That's what 1 Peter says. Yes.
What the Catholic worship services have looked like at that time? Were there any type of congregational hymns, or was it a choir that would just sing the mass, or what?
That is a good question. If you want a glimpse of what Roman Catholic worship service would have looked like at the time of the Reformation, if you attend a church that celebrates the traditional Latin Mass, that is a pretty good snapshot of what would have been very similar at the time of the Reformation. I believe St. Stan's in Milwaukee does this on a regular basis. Not to say that you should be attending there all the time, but if you want an example of what this looks like, that you'll be able to see that. I had a class through my Concordia program that was entitled Liturgy and Culture, and so we were required to visit a couple of places that had a completely different worship environment than what we were used to, what we were familiar with. And I thought, given the program that I was in with, and our professor there had said, traditional Latin Mass, this would fit. And so I heard, well, there is one in Milwaukee. And so we went there. One of my colleagues decided to take that in one evening. And you sit there. You sit there. All the action takes place up front. The priest and those who are serving at the altar do everything. If there is singing, it's done by a choir or a cantor. But the congregation does not. And so this is, again, a significant shift at the time of the Reformation to say, you should be involved. You who are attending here are not just here to observe, are not just here to let the priest work for you. That the work is not done only up front. The work is done by the people, which is what the word liturgy actually means, right? The work of the people. So that would have been a drastic shift at that time, to say people should be involved, not just in observing, going up to receive the sacrament, and then sitting down. Kneeling when you're supposed to kneel, praying along with the priest who prays. This would have been a drastically different environment than what they had seen. And of course, it's all in Latin. How much are you getting out of that? Anybody? Right, same thing for them. Most of the people in those days, most of the Germans that lived around Luther in Wittenberg, they didn't know Latin. And so what could you do but sit there and observe? And maybe you pick up on some of the familiar phrases here and there, but a lot of it you don't get. Yeah?
Quick dovetail of that. How did the Mass shift? How did they, because from what I understand, Mass was given that the people did not partake in the body of Christ, in the blood of Christ. At Luther's time, did the people start participating in the Lord's Supper, or when, or how did that? I'm just curious. I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, that was part of these church orders that they're trying to teach people, like, this is what the first time, and people would go up and they would receive the bread, but only the bread. And there was kind of a requirement that said, you really have to go like at least once a year. So anytime you set a minimum, guess how often most people would go? Whatever the minimum was, that's what if you don't meet the minimum, then you're not really a Christian. Well, I guess I got to go at least once. So they would offer a lot of worship services, but a lot of the times it was these private masses where the priests would go through all of the motions of the Mass, but there was no one there, but you still get kind of credit for that, right? Under that system of, you're not there to participate. You're not there necessarily to benefit by doing anything, but just by being present or just by paying for this service to be done, credit is applied, is kind of the idea, right? The ex opere operato approach. Just by the thing being done, you get credit in the system. And so this begins to change in Wittenberg when Luther goes to the Wartburg and Andreas Karlstadt takes over the lead of the Reformation movement in Wittenberg. So this would have been mid 1521 through the later part of the year up until Lent of 1522. And Karlstadt says, Luther never moved fast enough. We're putting the pedal to the metal. And he makes a whole bunch of changes for the Christmas Day service. And the people freak out. You have to hold out your hand. I'm going to place the body of Christ into your hand. You're not supposed to do that, right? I'm not going to. He throws off his robe. No, I'm just like one of you. We don't need priests. We don't need clergy. I'm just going to. All these changes with no education. Where Luther says, when he finally comes back, and he comes back at the beginning of Lent, even though the elector doesn't want him to, but he comes back, he says, I have to come back because this is getting out of control. And he's taking this movement, Karlstadt is taking this movement and running it off the rails, and it's going to crash and burn, and it's going to be bad. And so he comes back and preaches 8 sermons, a full week, one day after the next, and says, this is how reform needs to take place. You need to teach. You need to teach. You need to teach. Then you need to teach some more. And then maybe we can talk about change. Especially when it's these things that have been, there was no education. It was just, this is how we do it. And now you're trying to say, well, what you were doing was wrong. You thought it was good, but you're actually sinning, and I've got something better. Wait, do you? Or maybe this is wrong, or now I don't know what's right or wrong anymore, and this thing that is supposed to be about certainty, this thing that is supposed to be about assurance, is now causing all sorts of questions and doubt. What a terrible thing. What a terrible thing. So that's where then they say, okay, we need to work at some of these changes. We need to reform the Mass, but we need to do this right, and there needs to be education. And so that's when we get to 1523, 1525, that these things start to change a little bit more, and the pace moves much slower than what Karlstadt was doing, but moves more quickly than what it had been in the years prior, because they had now had the chance to do that education. Third one. First two, I think, are pretty straightforward. Let the blank of the blank be honored. Anyone want to take a stab at that one? Yeah? Go ahead.
Let the experience of the church be honored.
Let the experience of the church be honored. Let the experience of the church be honored. What does that mean? Put that in your own words. The Hebrews passage, it says, basically, remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. So how do you honor the experience of the church in worship?
Don't throw everything out.
Yeah. Here's a thought. Maybe the idea that you had, maybe a fine idea, but you're one person, and you just had that, as you're reading through something, watching something, listening to something, like, hey, maybe we should do this. All I'm going to say is, with a smidge of humility, understand that maybe the 2,000 years of church history, with all of the brilliant minds and pastoral concern that has led up to this point, maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss those ideas in place of this idea that I had last week, which might be a fine idea. But understand, we are where we are for a reason, and the things that have come down to us over 2,000 years of history have stuck around for a reason. And before we get rid of them, maybe we should make a real effort to understand what they are and why they're still here. The last one. Let the blank be used in service to the blank. Anyone? Yeah?
Gifts be used in service to the church.
Not bad, and we're real close. But I'm going to say we'll say it a little bit differently. You want to?
Is it, let the music be used in service to the words?
We're even closer, I would say. Let the arts be used in service to the gospel, which I think broadens each of those things just a little bit, right? Because when we're talking about arts, are we talking about music? Yes, absolutely we are. But what else are we including?
Spoken word.
Spoken word. That architecture. Along with architecture, what? Decor, art, right? That this was something too that Karlstadt was not a big fan of. It's like art, ew, get rid of it. We don't want any of it because art might be abused. So if there's a possibility to abuse it, I know, let's just get rid of it and then they can't abuse it. And Luther says maybe we should work on the abuse. It's the heart that's the problem, it's not the art. If we address the heart, then this art can be used rightly. And so art in a variety of ways remains a valuable thing to the Lutheran Church. But what is the purpose of art? You know what's that? To tell a story. But what is the purpose of art in the church, or at least what should it be? What story are we telling? Yeah, the story of Jesus, right? The story of the church. This is not just, the Metro Golden Mayer, MGM, the opening scene, right? You have the lion comes out, roar, right? And then you notice, if you look real close around you see a little Latin phrase. You remember, anyone catch that? Anyone know that? Art for art's sake, which is a very modern approach to this question. But the church says, we're not just interested in art for art's sake, although there's a place for that. But as far as the church is concerned, it's art largely for the sake of the gospel, for telling the story of God for his church, Christ for his church. Anything more you want to say on these? The last thing I have kind of by way of summary is, how does singing hymns help us accomplish these goals in our worship services? We've touched on a couple of them. I think the gospel, we said, well, they proclaim the gospel, right? The words are there. That's good, right? Yeah, Chloe.
They for sure let people participate because it's the one way people enjoy it.
Yeah. This is ready-made, built-in participation, right? That you should be able to sing along, right? This is meant for you to engage. And here's the really cool thing. As you're engaging, as you're singing, what are you doing for your neighbor sitting in the pew next to you? You are proclaiming the gospel to them. You are proclaiming the gospel to them, right? You are a preacher. It's not just the guy up front. You are a preacher of the gospel. Or you might be hurting their ears if, either if you're singing really loud or your strength is making a joyful noise rather than holding a tune. But participate. That's what this is about. We'll get a chance to highlight each of the other two as well, but maybe just a brief word. How is the experience of the church honored with hymns?
Filling up, like the historical.
Yeah, and maybe in German, right? This idea of, which was a hymn that was written 150 years ago, right? By a Roman Catholic. We're taking a look at the hymns of Luther. That was 500 years ago. One of the hymns that we're going to talk about, Luther did a reworking of a hymn that was written by Ambrose of Milan. That's over 1,500 years ago. And you look at these hymns that are drawn from people throughout the centuries in the church, from all across the globe. That's honoring the experience of the church. Let's talk a little bit about Luther's background in this. During his school years, Luther learned music. He claimed it was his favorite subject in school. Together with his classmates when he was in Eisenach, so this would have been, I think maybe junior high or high school years, would have been roughly the age that he was in Eisenach. Which Eisenach, outside of Eisenach, is the Wartburg Castle. So the town is Eisenach. That's where he was as a student. So he would have known that area when he was captive in the Wartburg. He often earned meals by singing at the home of wealthy people around town, like Ursula Cotta, which her home is still there. You can see that if you visit. Luther played the lute well and was an excellent singer with a tenor voice, we're told. Also, that going around singing it was kind of the expectation, it was the tradition of the town, that the townspeople, it wasn't like he had to go out and beg because they were so poor or they treated the students so poorly. No, it was kind of the tradition of the town that they would go around and the townspeople would take care of the students and they would sing for their supper, provide a little entertainment, and spend a little time then in their homes. This is a picture of Luther playing the lute. It's on the Reformation Monument in Erfurt, where Luther went to university. So that would have been a few years later. But lute, kind of like a guitar, but not quite. Although he was not educated by a professional musician, Luther had enough skill to write a four-voice motet. So that's not so much a hymn, but he could write polyphonic music that way. He also wrote several hymns. At least in the Luther's Works version, they have almost 40 hymns that Luther wrote. We don't have quite that many in our hymnal, but we have a good chunk of them. He drew inspiration for his hymns from a number of sources. He translated older Latin hymns, revised other poems and hymns, paraphrased psalms, adapted other biblical texts, and of course he wrote his own original texts. He had a musician that he worked with as a partner and a consultant named Johann Walter, who was the cantor at the church in Torgau. A cantor was a musician and a composer that served in a congregation. The most famous cantor in Lutheran circles would have been J.S. Bach, who would have been a couple hundred years later, but he was also a Lutheran, and he was serving in the city of Leipzig at St. Thomas Church. Bach was also born in Eisenach. So there's a museum. If you go to see Wartburg Castle, if you want to see the Ursula Cotta House, or a couple other places, you can also go to Bach's Birth House Museum, where they will do live demonstrations on period instruments from the time of Bach, which is really a cool experience. Because of the prolific output that he had and the fact that he was the first to put hymn singing, some said that Luther is to our church as David was to Old Testament worship. Agree or disagree? That's a legitimate comparison to make. Yeah?
Did he write music prior to the Reformation?
Luther? He was certainly involved in music. If he wrote things, it was probably that people just didn't care about them until he became this overnight celebrity with the posting of the 95 Theses. So he may have, I don't know if we have anything from before the 95 Theses, but that'd be something I'd have to look to be sure. Yes?
I had never thought of David as changing the worship. Can you explain how he did that in the Old Testament?
Well, I think from before the time of David, I believe this is accurate. How many psalms do we have before the time of David? One, because it's by Moses. We know Psalm 90 is by Moses, and there are a couple of other songs that are included in the Pentateuch, right? But then we get to David, and now you have dozens that are recorded for us with David's name attached, right? So I think that's probably was some of that going on? Sure. But part of it is we don't have the evidence of it, right? And so then but 500 years after Moses, David has all sorts of these songs that we call psalms, which seems to point to there's been a bit of a shift, or at least a growth in this. That's I think kind of why you'd make a statement like that.
It might make an argument for Solomon, because he also wrote, and then he also built the temple. But David, didn't he have there's the verse written that he danced in praise to the Lord, and that was a bit shocking.
Yeah.
I think his wife got upset at him.
True.
And that, dancing and worship, change of the customs.
Yes. And David is known as a musician, but I think part of it is, like I said, we just don't have there's a lot of things that we would like to know a bit more about that we just don't have, But we know that part of it, Moses certainly would have changed things too, because at the time of Moses, now you finally have the institution of the tabernacle worship, right? But things change with David's son Solomon when the tabernacle now is replaced by the temple, but a lot of similarities remain. Let's talk just briefly, by way of introduction, with Dear Christians, One and All Rejoice. This was the parish that I served, which had the opportunity to do a remodel for their 75th anniversary, which was back in 2016. And the church was named Martin Luther, and so the thought was we should have something that focuses on our identity as a church. And you maybe can't quite make that out as far as the altar piece, but this shows it a little bit more. The congregation chose this hymn to be the identifying feature to kind of base the architectural, the art design for the remodel around this hymn. It was the first of Luther's hymns that was written specifically for congregational worship, and it includes a clear Trinitarian reference, which you see on the plaques on the front. And the idea there is we worked with Nathan Pope, who was also designer for the altar furnishings at the Chapel of the Christ in New Ulm, and said, we want to have something, or he said we should have something Trinitarian here on the front. You have a clear Trinitarian reference here in Dear Christians, One and All Rejoice. And the thing that we're going to focus on here, Dear Christians, One and All Rejoice, is that good Lutheran hymns, and this has been the case really from the beginning, but for 500 years or so, this has been the focus. Good Lutheran hymns include teaching or doctrine, which the Germans would call Lehre, and it would also include comfort or consolation for souls. And that is called Trost. And that is probably where I can say I'm going to give you a little homework assignment. If you want to take a look at this hymn between now and next week, go through there, look for, do you see teaching? What teachings do you see? Do you see comfort for souls? And maybe also, as you look down the list, do you specifically see law and gospel? Where do you see law? Where do you see gospel? And that is where we'll pick it up next time. Thank you again for the invite to join you. Thank you also for your participation and good questions that you brought. And we will get into, we'll wrap Dear Christians, One and All Rejoice. And then next time, we will get into A Mighty Fortress is Our God and Isaiah, Mighty Seer in Days of Old. We'll see you next week.